Hi there, I'm Jeanette Lane for Australian Simply Cards, and in today's video I'm sharing how to heat emboss with your embossing folder designs. So it's a super easy technique. Here is the gift included in the issue. So it's a Christmas holly embossing folder and stamp set, and this is part of the Apple Blossom All Occasion collection. So we have this gorgeous 6x6 embossing folder with two patterns and then that signature wave across the center. Now what's great about these stamps is that they're also in that wave pattern, so you can add some lovely sentiments right across your embossing, which we're going to do in just a bit. Here's the card that I'm going to be making in the tutorial. So as you can see, it's embossed. So we've embossed that with our beautiful Christmas holly embossing folder, but I've also done heat embossing in two colors. So I can't wait to show you. Let's get started. So the first thing you're going to need is a piece of white cardstock. Now this is cut to 6x6 inches so that it fits the embossing folder. But before we put our cardstock into our embossing folder, we want to ink up our folder with some embossing ink. So here I have this Wow embossing pad, and it's clear, ultra slow drying, which I can attest to. It really does dry slowly, and this is great because it gives you time to grab your embossing powders and sprinkle them on and shake off the excess and all that. So it's great that you have that slow drying embossing ink. At this point, you can decide which side of the embossing folder you would like to ink. I've always had, sorry, there's a little fuzz there. I've always had the best luck doing it on the debossed side. So the debossed side of the design. So it's just mostly flat. Here, if you run your finger over it, you can feel the raised edges of the texture of the design. But what I'm going to do is just ink this side. I've always had the best luck with that. So I'm just going to tap my embossing ink pad all across my embossing folder. Now, because we have this wave design in the middle, what I'm going to do to ensure that there's no embossing ink there, I'm going to take a little wipey, so a baby wipe, and I'm just going to wipe off any embossing ink that might have got into that wave design, because we want it to be clear of any embossing powder. And then I'm going to take a dry tissue and just go over the wave design to make sure there's no ink there. And now I can emboss my paper. So I'm going to put my paper inside, and I'm going to close this. So once you close your embossing folder, make sure that you don't open it again. Don't shift it around. You are committed. Once you've closed it, you are committed to whatever result you get. So for our embossing pads, for our Cuttlebug, I'm going to be using a Cuttlebug. So it's the A platform, and then a B cutting pad, our embossing folder with our cardstock, and then another B cutting pad on top, and we're just going to run this through. Okay, so we're going to take out our paper. It is now embossed, and I'm going to grab a piece of scrap paper, and we're going to put our embossed card on top, and we're going to grab our embossing powder. So the first embossing powder I'm going to be using is this glitter silvery color, and this is Silver Tinsel from Ranger. So I'm going to just sprinkle that on the bottom part of our design. And then I'm just going to slide off that embossing powder, sprinkle just a little bit more here in the places where it looks like it didn't take the first time around. And then we just tap off our excess. It's also great to have a clean and dry paintbrush on hand so that you can just brush off any places where the embossing powder was being a little rebellious. So right on this wave, I want to make sure that my wave is clean for my for my stamp sentiment in just a bit. So I'm making sure that there's no embossing powder on this wave. So I'm just going to slide that off. Just brush that off, not slide it off. All right, so now that we have our first embossing color, now we can switch over to our second embossing color, which is going to be red glitter, and that embossing powder is Red Glitz from Wow. So now I'm just going to rotate my embossed piece of cardstock, and then I'm going to sprinkle that right just on this part of the design, so where the holly leaves are. So I've shaken off the excess red embossing powder, and now I'm just going to take my brush and go over that wave because I don't want any red and I don't want any silver embossing powder on this wave. So I'm going to save my excess embossing powder for next time, and then I'm going to use my heat tool, which is the Wow Embossing Heat Tool. It's the second model, so the newest model, and then we're just going to melt our embossing powder. The Wow Embossing tool has two settings. So it has a lower setting and then it has a second setting with higher heat. And I ended up burning just this little edge here because it's so hot. That second setting is really, really hot. So if you need something embossed speedily, you can do that, but you want to make sure that you don't burn your paper because it's so hot, it can burn your paper. So be careful with that. What I'm gonna do is just trim that here so it doesn't show that piece where it got burnt, but man, that embossing tool is powerful, so be very careful. So here is our heat embossed card. Now, if you notice that there's some areas that weren't embossed properly, maybe you didn't, you missed it with the embossing ink pad, what you can do is get an embossing pen. Now there's different kinds, different brands on the market, and this one is the Wow Embossing Pen, and it's got a fine tip there with embossing ink inside, so you can just go over your design where you missed, so you would add the ink there, and then sprinkle more embossing powder and shake off the excess. So that's a great tool to have in your stash for any mix-ups, mess-ups, any accidents. Now the next step is to stamp our sentiment onto our card. So there's several to choose from in the Christmas Holly embossing folder and stamp set. So there's some sentiments that go all the way across, but then there's two that only go halfway. So Christmas wishes is one, and then the other one is have a jolly holiday. So I'm going to grab the have a jolly holiday. I'm going to stamp that here, and I'm going to be using archival ink in black. So I'm going to mount my stamp onto my acrylic block, and then I'm going to grab my ink and make sure my stamp gets all inky. I like to stamp my surface first to make sure that my stamp is properly mounted. So as you saw me just pressing down without any ink, and then I can ink it up. So we're just loading this up with ink. And then we can stamp our card right there. Looks good. Now it's time to mount our card onto our card blank. So here I have a green card blank, so I'm just going to glue that on there. And for my adhesive, I'm using the Cosmic Shimmer Dries Clear acrylic glue, which I absolutely love. And we're just going to squeeze a bit here, all on the back side of our embossing. I wanted to add some more sparkle to my card, so I'm going to be adding some green gemstones. And this is Anita's gemstone wheel. Got confused there because I use the pearl wheel so much. Okay, so we're just gonna add some green gemstones. So I'm just gonna put a few little dots here and then put the gemstones on top. Sorry, dots of adhesive, and then one on this side. And then we'll add our gemstones and be done. And I'm done with my card. I hope that you enjoyed this easy heat embossing card tutorial. I'm Jeanette Lane for Australian Simply Cards. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in a video real soon.